I'm Jennifer, the Inquiring Quilter. Welcome to another episode of Intelligent Quilting, where you learn not only how to do a particular quilting technique, but also why you should do that particular technique that way. Today we're going to talk about making half square triangles 4 at a time. I will confess, this is probably my least favorite method for making half square triangles. And the reason is because when you make half square triangles this way, you end up with bias or stretchiness along the 4 sides. That means they can easily stretch out of shape. And if you have trouble making half square triangles accurately, or getting an accurate 1/4 of an inch, or getting your quilts to sew to all your blocks to sew together and get a flat quilt, don't use this method, frankly. But for those of you who'd want to give it a go anyway, I will show you how. You will be starting, like all the other methods, 2 at a time and 8 at a time. You'll be starting with 2 squares of fabric, and you'll end up, in this case, with 4 identical half square triangles. First, let's talk about the tools you'll need. It's always good to have some sharp pins for holding your fabrics together, especially this method, because you're going to be making 4 at a time and you're dealing with bias. So let's make sure the fabrics don't shift at all by pinning them well. I'm going to need a rotary cutter and a ruler, because this method results in half square triangles that are larger than you need, so you have to trim them down to size. Cutting mat. It is nice to have a rotating cutting mat, because you've got 4 sides on your half square triangle, and so you could cut 2 sides and then rotate the mat and then cut the other 2 sides. So it's nice to have something like that. But if you don't, if you've got a small mat that you can just lift up and rotate manually, that will work just as well. Something that is not a necessity, but I love it, because it saves me half the time in trimming up those half square triangles. It's a specialty ruler called the Triangle Square Up Ruler. There are other rulers that are similar, but I happen to like this one. Also, because you're dealing with bias, something that should be right next to your ironing board is Best Press. Highly recommend it. It's a starch alternative, so what it's going to do is stabilize your fabrics so that you can cut them accurately, but also you can sew them and be a little bit less scared of that stretchy bias. So those are the tools that you're going to need. It does help to have an iron, and when we get to that part, I'll show you some of the things I like to use when I'm pressing. The other reason I don't particularly like this method is that it involves some math. Not that I'm not good at math, but you know, sometimes you just don't want to stop and do the calculating. So what size do I need to cut my squares, Jennifer? Well, before I give you the formula, let me give you a pitch. If you don't want to have to do the calculating, you can click the link in the description of this video. It will take you to a free download on my website that has charts in it that will tell you exactly what size you need to cut your squares, whether you're making half square triangles 2 at a time, 4 at a time, or 8 at a time. So you can skip the math and just click and it'll be right there. Just in case you're interested, the math is that you take the unfinished size of the half square triangles you want and divide them by 0.64, and then you add a fudge factor. So let's say I want to make 2-inch finished half square triangles. Unfinished, they are 2.5 inches. So I'm going to take 2.5 divided by 0.64. That's going to get me 3.9. If I round that up to 4 and then add 1/4 of an inch, that gives me a lot of room so that I can trim my half square triangles down and know that they are the perfect size. So again, take the unfinished size that you're looking for, plus, or divided by 0.64, round up, and then add 1/4 inch. And that will give you, in this case, 4 1/4. So that's what size I've cut my squares. Unlike the 2 at a time and 8 at a time method, I don't need to mark my squares. So all I need to do is pin them, and then I will go to the sewing machine. So let's just take my 2 squares, right sides together. And again, because we're going to be dealing with bias later, we might as well pin. Make sure these 2 squares don't shift. So I've got pinned. So now I'm ready to take it to my sewing machine, and then I'll come back and we'll finish up. We've got our fabrics pinned and we're ready to sew. Before we do, however, a couple of things. First of all, well, I'm sewing with contrasting threads so that you'll see what I'm doing. But normally I would choose a matching thread. Also, I like to press my seams open, so what I'm going to do before I start stitching is lower my stitch length just a couple of notches, so let me do that. Okay, and I think that's it. The other thing, you're going to be sewing 1/4 inch all the way around, so you'll have to watch for when to pivot here. I happen to have a mark on my foot that helps me know when I'm when the needle is 1/4 inch away. If you don't have something like that, you'll just have to eyeball it, or you know, make a dot if you want to, so that you know when to turn. So here I go. Stop with the needle down, raise your presser foot and pivot, and then continue sewing. Again, you're going to be sewing 1/4 inch all the way around. Go to the next corner here, and pivot. Do you have a name for your sewing machine? A lot of people have named their sewing machines, and I have not figured out what the name of mine should be. It's a Janome, so I suppose it should be Jan or something, but I don't know. If you've got an idea for what I should call my sewing machine, you just leave it there in the comments, because I would love to. You know, I never was a person who named cars or anything, so I guess maybe that's why I haven't named it, but I really should, since she's now a star. Okay, I've sewn all the way around, 1/4 inch away, so I'm ready to just cut my threads, and I'm gonna start, I'll press it and cut into half square triangles, so let's go do that. Well, we're back from the sewing machine, and I've got my square all sewed up, so it's time now to cut it apart and press my half square triangles. So I have sewn 1/4 inch around all sides, and I'm going to cut from corner to corner on the diagonal this direction. Let's see. Okay, and then without moving that, I'm going to rotate, lift my ruler, and put it down and cut corner to corner this direction as well. Make sure that right on. I think I missed that just a tiny bit. There we go. Okay, so we've cut, and now we've got 4. So let me show you how we will press these. You can press to the dark, which is very common. If you do, you might want to press over, finger press first, then use your iron. By the way, you can use the tip of your iron to kind of nudge that seam maybe just a tiny bit more. I like to press on a wool pressing mat because it radiates the heat back up and really provides a flat seam. Also, I like to press with a hot iron, that means cotton setting, with no water in it, so I'm no steam. Press the other side. I also like to use this. This is a tailor's clapper. The heat from the wood helps radiate the heat back down so that it can finish cooking, as it were, and flattening that seam. Also, the weight of it helps flatten too. So, game changer when I got a clapper and I got a wool pressing mat. Anyway, nice and flat, isn't it? So, ready to trim. There is a diagonal running straight through the square, and I'm going to use that diagonal to trim this accurately. Look for the 45-degree line on your ruler and set it on the seam line. And we're going to trim just a little off this side and that side, and then finish trimming to size on the other side there. So first, cut away from me, and then I'm going to not budge anything, and cut away from me on the other side. That's 2 cuts. So these 2 are the clean cuts. So I'm going to rotate. Let's see, those 2 are the clean cuts. I forgot what I was doing. Oh dear. Okay. Going to cut those 2 sides. So I'm going to, again, take the 45-degree, this time placing the 45-degree on my seam and my 2.5-inch mark there, my 2.5-inch mark here on the 2 sides I just trimmed. I'm going to trim that side and trim that side. And now I have a perfect half square triangle that's 2.5 inches. So that's one way to press and trim. Let me show you the secret for fast trimming your half square triangles. Before you press anything, you will want to trim using your triangle square up ruler. And the way that works, let me get this so you can see. This has 2 sets of lines. You need to use the line that matches up to the size you're trimming to. These are going to be 2-inch finish, but right now I'm trimming them to 2.5. So I look for the 2.5-inch line on this ruler, and that's what I'm going to use. I take the 2.5-inch line, I put it on my seam line. There. And I'm going to trim these 2 sides. That side. I do like a rotary cutting mat, so I am trimming away from myself. That way I'm not trimming towards myself and possibly cutting off a finger or whatever. And believe me, it does happen. These things are sharp. So now by trimming just 2 sides, when I open it up, I've actually trimmed all 4 sides. So I have trimmed my half square triangle 2 sides to the correct size in half the time. So let me show you about pressing, different way to press. I like to press my seams open. So again, if you're going to do that, you could finger press first, then use the point of your iron. Let it do its work. It will open that seam up for you. And again, the weight of the iron is helping to flatten that seam, and the wool pressing mat is also doing that. Press the other side, and then clap, 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 clap. Now, the only problem with this method, at least initially, is that the dog ears are still there, and that might bother you when you're trying to line these up and sew them. They don't really get in the way too much, but they're kind of a bit of a bother, and they add bulk. So let me show you a trick. You can, as I said, make 2 cuts and trim up your half square triangle. By the way, you can also make a single cut if you're good. You line up this side with that edge. Make sure you're 2.5 inches on the seam. I'm going to cut once, and I've now cut it to size. Yay! To get rid of the dog ears, I turn it upside down. Use the 2.5 inch line again, and I use this center line on the center point. And I'm gonna just trim off, boink, and I don't wanna do too many, so they're across. I'm trimming off those dog ears. Now when I press this open, and by the way, my particular clapper has wool on the top, so I can press on it. So this is actually how I like to press my seams open. This is just a fantastic clapper. The roundness of the top just really opens up that seam. Just let it sit there for a second, and then press it flat. And then use the clapper to finish off the job. Finish cooking. And then when you're done, voila, now I have 4, well, I still have to press this one, but I've got 4 half square triangles from 2 squares of fabric, all done at one time. Again, keep in mind that this method does leave bias, so you be very careful and don't handle these things all that much after trimming. Just kind of set them aside and leave them alone until you've sewn them into a block. And I hope you will follow me by clicking the follow button. Don't forget that I have put links to all of the tools I mentioned in the video description, so look for them there. Also, there is a link to the math cheat sheet, I guess, the half square triangle cheat sheet that tells you exactly what size to cut your squares. The link to that is also in this video description, so don't forget to grab that. And I forgot, if you like photo tutorials that step you through the process, I do have those on my blog, so I will link to that as well in the description, and feel free to go check that out too. I think that's it, so goodbye and see you on the next episode of Intelligent Quilting.